Looking back, the signs were always there, small cracks beneath the surface of a life that seemed picture-perfect from the outside. Gia and I had been married for 12 years. We had 3 beautiful kids, a home in the suburbs, and a life that, to anyone else, might have looked ideal. But appearances can be deceiving. Gia had always had expensive tastes, designer clothes, luxury handbags, spa weekends that seemed to come more often than the seasons changed. I worked long hours to provide for our family, but it was never quite enough for her. Still, I never thought she'd cross a line to get what she wanted. Then came the handbag. It was late on a Friday afternoon when I first noticed it, a sleek, designer purse resting on the kitchen counter. I recognized the brand immediately. It was the kind of handbag you didn't just buy on impulse unless money was no object. And in our case, it wasn't. "Where'd you get that?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light as I set my briefcase down by the door. Gia glanced up from her phone, her smile quick and practiced. "Oh, this? I found it on sale downtown. Can you believe the discount?" Something in her voice, too casual, too rehearsed, made my stomach tighten. But I forced a smile and nodded, pushing the doubt aside. After all, she was my wife. I had no reason to question her. At least, that's what I told myself. Over the next few days, little things began to nag at me. Gia seemed more distracted than usual, her phone never far from her hand. She'd glance at the screen, smile slightly, then set it down face down as if to hide the notifications. One evening, as I sat beside her on the couch, her phone buzzed with a message. She picked it up quickly, angling the screen away from my view. "Who's that?" I asked casually. "Just a friend," she replied without looking up. I wanted to believe her, but the knot in my chest tightened a little more. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the truth began to unravel. I was at work, typing out emails, when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Clyde Thompson?" a serious voice asked. "Yes, speaking," I replied. "This is Officer Daniels from the City Police Department. I'm calling regarding your wife, Gia." My heart dropped into my stomach. "Is she okay? What happened?" "There was an incident at Bellamy's boutique downtown," he said, his tone measured and professional. "Your wife was detained after attempting to leave the store with an unpaid handbag." I gripped the edge of my desk, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "There must be some mistake. She was released after speaking with Judge Hawthorne," the officer continued. "The matter is being handled privately, but I thought you should be informed." "Judge Hawthorne?" The name rang a faint bell, but I was too stunned to place it. "Thank you," I managed, my thoughts spinning as I ended the call. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. My pulse pounded in my ears as I tried to make sense of what I'd just heard. Gia stealing? The woman who prided herself on appearances, who wouldn't be caught dead in anything less than designer labels, caught shoplifting, and a judge had helped her out of it. When I got home that night, Gia was in the kitchen making dinner as if nothing had happened. The faint scent of garlic and basil filled the air, warm and familiar, but the tension in my chest wouldn't ease. "Hey, babe," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey." I set my keys on the counter, watching her carefully. "I got a call today. From the police." Her hand stilled on the cutting board, the knife hovering mid-air. "Oh? Something about an incident at Bellamy's boutique." She set the knife down and wiped her hands on a towel, her smile quick but strained. "Oh, that? It was just a misunderstanding. I was looking at a handbag and must have crossed the sensor near the door." The alarms went off, and the security guard freaked out. She waved a hand as if brushing the whole thing away. Judge Hawthorne stepped in and cleared everything up. "No big deal." "No big deal?" I repeated slowly. "Gia, they said you were detained." "Briefly," she said quickly, moving past me to stir the sauce simmering on the stove. "The judge knows our family. He made a few calls, and it was all sorted out." End of story. Something about the way she said it, the too casual shrug, the way she avoided my eyes set my nerves on edge. But before I could press further, our youngest daughter, Lily, came running into the kitchen, breaking the tension with a burst of laughter. Gia turned, scooping her up with a bright smile that seemed to erase all traces of the conversation, but as I watched her laugh with our daughter, the knot in my chest only tightened, because deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story, that it was only the beginning. Over the next few days, the unease in my chest refused to fade. No matter how many times I replayed Gia's explanation, something about it didn't sit right. The way she had brushed it off, the quick smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, it all felt too rehearsed. Too smooth. And then there was Judge Hawthorne. His name lingered in the back of my mind like an itch I couldn't scratch. How did Gia know him well enough for him to step in and clear things up so quickly? I hadn't even known she was connected to anyone in the legal world. That I tried to push the thoughts aside, but doubt has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. It wasn't long before I started noticing other changes, small things that, on their own, might have meant nothing. Gia's phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, now seemed permanently glued to her hand. She'd glance at it and smile, then quickly tuck it into her purse or pocket if I walked into the room. Her late-night errands became more frequent, quick trips to the grocery store, spontaneous outings to meet friends I'd never heard of. One night, I woke up to find her side of the bed empty. I glanced at the clock, 2:13 a.m. Frowning, I got up and padded down the hallway, my pulse quickening with each step. The faint glow of light spilled from the living room, accompanied by the soft murmur of her voice. I paused outside the doorway, heart hammering as I listened. I know, but it's risky. Her voice was low, urgent. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Not yet. Silence. A faint laugh, soft and breathless in a way that made my stomach twist. I stepped into the doorway. Gia? She gasped, spinning around with her phone clutched to her chest. Her eyes widened briefly before she forced a smile. Clyde. You scared me. Who were you talking to? I asked, my voice tight. Oh, just Amelia, she said quickly. She's going through a rough time, so I was keeping her company. You know how she gets. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of a lie. Her smile was steady, her gaze unflinching. And yet, something about the way she held her phone like a lifeline she couldn't let go of made my pulse thrum with suspicion. Come back to bed, I said after a moment. Of course. She placed her phone on the coffee table and followed me upstairs, her footsteps light against the carpet, but long after she settled beside me, her breaths evening out into the rhythm of sleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. The next day, the tension between us felt almost tangible, like a thread pulled too tight. Gia moved through the house with practiced ease, her smile bright and her laughter easy. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the previous night. By the time I returned home, my chest ached with the weight of unanswered questions. Later that evening, as Gia prepared dinner, her phone buzzed on the counter. She was at the stove, her back turned, and for a moment, I hesitated, then I glanced at the screen. Unknown number, tomorrow. Same place. Don't be late. My pulse spiked. I stared at the message, my mind racing with possibilities. Before I could process what I'd seen, Gia turned around, her eyes flicking to the phone. Everything okay? She asked, her smile quick but strained. I stepped back from the counter, forcing a nod. Yeah, just thought I heard something. She picked up her phone, her fingers moving swiftly as she typed a reply. Then she set it down again, her smile returning as if nothing had happened. But as we sat down for dinner, the message echoed in my mind. Tomorrow. Same place. Don't be late. And I knew one thing for certain, I had to find out what she was hiding. The next day, I couldn't shake the message from my mind. Tomorrow. Same place. Don't be late. The words clung to me like a warning I couldn't ignore. Gia left that afternoon, claiming she had errands to run. My pulse hammered as I watched her drive away, the question burning in my mind, where was she going? Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and followed her. Her car wove through downtown, finally pulling into a parking lot near the courthouse. My breath caught as I watched her step out and glance around before heading toward the side entrance. She paused at the door, hesitating, then a figure stepped from the shadows, Judge Hawthorne. He leaned close, his hand brushing her arm as they exchanged a few hushed words. Gia glanced around nervously, then followed him inside. I sat frozen, heart pounding as realization crashed over me. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was something else. I sat in my car, pulse hammering in my chest as the courthouse doors closed behind Gia and Judge Hawthorne. My mind raced, piecing together fragments of suspicion that now felt impossible to ignore. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Each second dragged heavier than the last. Finally, the side door creaked open. Gia stepped out first, smoothing her blouse as she glanced over her shoulder. Hawthorne followed a moment later, his hand brushing the small of her back before they parted ways. My breath caught in my throat. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white as the truth settled like a stone in my chest. This wasn't just about a handbag, this was about them. That night, the house felt colder than usual. The sounds of our children laughing in the other room should have been comforting, but all I could hear was the faint echo of Gia's footsteps disappearing into that courthouse. She moved through the kitchen with her usual grace, humming softly as she plated dinner. But all I could see was the way Judge Hawthorne had touched her, the casual intimacy of a gesture that spoke volumes. "Long day?" she asked, glancing up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah," I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. I forced myself to sit at the table, pretending everything was fine while my thoughts swirled with questions I couldn't ask. After the kids went to bed, I found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone with that same distant smile. "Gia," I said, stepping into the doorway. She glanced up. I hesitated for a moment, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Where were you today?" Her smile faltered. "I told you I had errands." "At the courthouse?" I asked, my gaze steady. Her fingers tightened around her phone. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you," I said, my voice low but firm. "With Judge Hawthorne." Silence stretched between us like a chasm. For a moment, her eyes flashed with something guilt, maybe, but then she masked it with a quick laugh. "You're being ridiculous," she said, standing up and brushing past me as if the conversation was over. But as she walked away, I knew this wasn't over. The air between us hung heavy with unspoken words. Gia's laughter still echoed faintly in my mind, forced, hollow, a shield against the truth she didn't want to face. I followed her down the hallway, my pulse hammering in my chest. "Gia, stop," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She paused at the bedroom door, her shoulders stiff. Slowly, she turned to face me, her smile gone. "What's your problem, Clyde?" "I saw you," I repeated, stepping closer. "With Judge Hawthorne. Outside the courthouse." For a split second, her eyes widened just enough for me to see the flash of panic before she caught herself. "You were following me?" she shot back, her voice rising. "Don't turn this around on me," I said. "What were you doing there?" "I had to meet with him about the handbag situation," she replied quickly, her words tumbling out too fast. "He's helping make sure the charges are dropped, that's all." "That's all?" I repeated, stepping closer until there was only a foot of space between us. "Then why did you sneak through the side entrance? Why did he touch you like that?" Gia's breath hitched, her hands clenching at her sides. "You're imagining things," she said, her voice lower now, more controlled. "I needed his help, so I met him privately. Nothing happened." Her gaze held mine, steady and unblinking. But the knot in my chest only tightened. "You're lying," I said softly, her lips parted as if she might argue, but no words came out. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, she turned away, her voice cold as she said, "Believe what you want, Clyde." And with that, she disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me standing alone in the hallway, heart pounding, fists clenched, and the truth slipping further from my grasp. The next few days passed in a haze of tension and half-spoken words. Gia moved through the house as if nothing had changed, smiling at the kids, humming while she cooked, her laughter ringing through the rooms as if she hadn't just lied to my face, but I could feel it now. The distance. The silence between sentences. The way her phone never left her side, that I started watching her more closely, taking note of the subtle shifts, the way her smile seemed to falter when I entered the room, the quick glances she stole toward her phone, the late-night errands that stretched longer than they should. One evening, as I worked late in my home office, I heard the faint creak of the front door. My pulse spiked. I glanced at the clock, 10:47 p.m. Setting my laptop aside, I moved quietly to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see outside. Gia stood on the porch, phone pressed to her ear. Her back was to me, but I could see the tension in her posture, the way she paced slightly as she spoke. "No. Not tonight," she said, her voice low but urgent. "It's too risky. He's been asking questions." My breath caught in my throat. She paused, listening. Then she laughed softly, nervously. "Tomorrow, then. Same place." My pulse thundered in my ears. She ended the call and lingered for a moment, staring out into the night as if gathering her thoughts. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped back inside. That I quickly moved from the window, heart hammering as I returned to my desk, pretending to type. Moments later, she appeared in the doorway, her smile quick but strained. "Couldn't sleep," she said with a shrug. "Needed some air." I forced a smile. "Everything okay?" "Of course," she replied smoothly. "Why wouldn't it be?" But as she turned and disappeared down the hall, her words echoed in my mind. "Tomorrow, then. Same place." This time, I wasn't going to let her slip away. The next day, the tension coiled tighter in my chest with every hour that passed. Gia moved through the morning routine with her usual grace, packing the kids' lunches, sipping coffee with a smile that didn't quite meet her eyes. But I could see it now, the quick glances at her phone, the way her fingers tapped against the countertop as if counting down the minutes. By noon, she was slipping on her coat. "I have a few errands to run," she said casually, brushing her hair over her shoulder. I forced a smile. "Need any help?" "No, I've got it. Won't be long." Her smile lingered for a moment too long, as if testing whether I'd question her. I didn't. I waited until the front door clicked shut and the sound of her car faded down the street before I grabbed my keys. This time, I wasn't going to let her out of my sight. That I kept my distance as I followed her downtown. My hands clenched the steering wheel tighter with every turn she took. When her car finally pulled into a parking lot near the courthouse, my pulse thundered in my ears. That I parked a few spaces away, heart hammering as I watched her step out, glance around, and head toward the side entrance. Her pace was quick, purposeful, and then a figure emerged from the shadows near the courthouse steps. Judge Hawthorne. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in Gia's shoulders as she approached him. Their words were too quiet to hear, but the way they stood close, too close, sent a chill through me. Hawthorne reached out, his hand brushing her arm in a gesture that lingered just a moment too long. Gia glanced around nervously, then followed him inside. My breath caught in my throat. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, staring at the courthouse door as if willing it to open and prove me wrong. But deep down, I already knew, this wasn't about a handbag. This was something else, something that had crossed a line long before today. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Each minute stretched like an eternity. Finally, the side door opened again. Gia stepped out first, smoothing her blouse and glancing over her shoulder with a nervous smile. Hawthorne followed a moment later, pausing beside her with a hand resting lightly on the small of her back. They exchanged a few last words, too soft to hear, then parted ways. Gia heading toward her car, Hawthorne disappearing back into the courthouse. I sat gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. My breath came in shallow gasps as the pieces finally clicked together, sharp as broken glass. The late nights. The secret phone calls. The quick glances and half-answers. I had the truth now, but the hardest part was still to come. I drove home in a haze, the city lights blurring past my window as my thoughts spiraled. The image of Gia stepping out of the courthouse, her blouse slightly rumpled, her smile quick but strained. It replayed in my mind like a scene from a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands ached from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I sat there for a moment, staring at the darkened windows of our home. Inside, our children were probably finishing their homework or watching TV, blissfully unaware that their world was about to shatter. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath before stepping out of the car. My footsteps felt heavy as I made my way inside, each step echoing in the quiet house. Gia was already in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. The air smelled of garlic and rosemary, but the warmth of it did nothing to ease the knot in my chest. "Hey," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're home early." I set my keys down on the counter, watching her carefully. "Yeah. I finished up early today." "Good. Dinner's almost ready." She turned back to the stove, her movements smooth and practiced as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just walked out of a courthouse with another man. I clenched my jaw, the words burning in my throat. But the kids' laughter echoed faintly from the other room, reminding me that this wasn't the time. "Not yet." "Smells good," I said instead, my voice hollow. "Thanks," she replied, glancing at me with that same quick smile, the smile of someone who thought their secret was still safe. But I knew, and soon, she'd know that I knew. The air in the house felt heavier that night. Every sound, the clink of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint laughter of our kids, felt distant, like echoes from a life that no longer belonged to me. Gia moved through the kitchen with her usual grace, her smile bright and her laughter easy. But now I could see the cracks beneath the surface, the way her eyes flicked toward her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, the slight tension in her shoulders, the pauses that lasted a moment too long. I sat at the table, my hands resting on my knees as I watched her. Every word, every glance between us felt like part of a carefully choreographed dance, one where we both knew the steps but neither of us wanted to admit the music had changed. "Can you pass the bread?" she asked, her voice light as she set a bowl of soup in front of me. I handed her the basket without a word, my mind still replaying the scene outside the courthouse, the way she had glanced over her shoulder, the way Judge Hawthorne's hand had lingered on her back. "So, how was your day?" she asked. Casually, sitting across from me. "Uneventful," I replied, forcing a smile. "Yours?" "Oh, you know, the usual errands. Nothing exciting." The lie slid from her lips so smoothly that for a moment, I almost believed her. But the memory of her phone call the night before, the urgency in her voice, the words, "tomorrow, then." Same place, burned fresh in my mind. I clenched my fists beneath the table, my nails digging into my palms as I forced myself to stay calm. "Not yet." I needed more than suspicion. I needed undeniable proof. Gia tilted her head slightly, her smile wavering. "You're quiet tonight. Everything okay?" I met her gaze, holding it longer than I should have. "Yeah, just tired." She seemed to relax at that, her smile returning as she turned her attention back to her soup. But as I watched her, I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke with the weight of unspoken truths pressing against my chest. The sun filtered through the curtains, painting warm streaks across the room, but the air between Gia and me felt colder than ever. She was already up, moving through the house with her usual efficiency, packing lunches, reminding the kids to grab their backpacks, and laughing at something our youngest said. But beneath the familiar routine, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked toward her phone whenever it buzzed. By the time the kids were off to school, the house was quiet again. Gia stood by the kitchen sink, rinsing out a coffee mug. Her phone sat face down on the counter beside her, the screen dark but not forgotten. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening. "Busy day today?" She glanced over her shoulder, her smile quick and smooth. "Not too bad. Just a few errands." "Another trip downtown?" I asked, watching her carefully. Her hand paused for just a fraction of a second before she set the mug down. "Maybe." "Why?" I shrugged, forcing my voice to stay casual. "Just curious." Her smile tightened at the edges. "Don't start this again, Clyde." Start what? I asked, my heart pounding as I took a step closer. Asking where my wife disappears to in the middle of the day? Her eyes flashed, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But then she inhaled slowly, composing herself. I told you it's nothing. Just errands. I glanced at her phone. Then you wouldn't mind if I looked at your phone, right? Her smile vanished. Excuse me? I held her gaze, my pulse hammering in my ears. If there's nothing to hide, let me see it. She snatched the phone off the counter, holding it tight against her chest. This is ridiculous. You're acting paranoid. Am I? I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. Or are you just scared I'll see the truth? She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, the phone buzzed in her hand. Her fingers tightened around it, her knuckles turning white. Without thinking, I grabbed the phone. She gasped, reaching for it, but I stepped back quickly, my thumb swiping across the screen before she could stop me. One unread message lit up the screen. Judge Hawthorne, meet me at the usual place. 1 p.m. Don't be late. Silence crashed down between us that I looked up slowly, meeting her wide-eyed gaze. So this is what it's been about all along? Clyde, no more lies, Gia. Not this time. Gia's face paled as I held up the phone, the message from Judge Hawthorne glowing like a spotlight on every lie she'd told. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. How long? I asked, my voice low and steady despite the fire burning inside me. Clyde, please, how long, Gia? I stepped closer, my pulse pounding in my ears, her eyes darted toward the floor. A few months, my breath hitched, and I clenched my fists to keep from shaking. Since the handbag incident? She nodded, her gaze still fixed on the ground. So that's how you avoided jail? My voice cracked as the pieces clicked together. You slept with him to make the charges disappear? It wasn't like that, don't lie to me. The words tore from my chest before I could stop them. Gia stepped back, her shoulders trembling. I didn't know what else to do. We couldn't afford the legal fees, and the kids. I couldn't let our family fall apart over one mistake. I stared at her, the air thick with unspoken accusations and shattered trust. And what about after that? Why did it keep going? Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know. It just happened. Silence settled between us, heavy and suffocating that I took a slow, shaky breath, my hands falling to my sides. I can't do this anymore, Gia. I can't live with someone who looks me in the eyes and lies day after day. Clyde, please, we can fix this, she whispered, but I shook my head, the last thread of hope snapping inside me. No, Gia. Some things can't be fixed. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words could have. Gia stood frozen, her breath shallow as she clutched her phone to her chest like it could shield her from the truth. But there was no escaping it now. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. That I laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in it. That's what they all say, isn't it? Her eyes shimmered with tears she didn't bother wiping away. Clyde, stop, I interrupted, my voice steady despite the ache tearing through my chest. Don't say you're sorry. Not when you knew exactly what you were doing. She took a shaky step forward. What about the kids? Please, let's not destroy our family over this. I clenched my fists at my sides, biting back the wave of anger rising in my throat. You did that the moment you chose to meet him behind my back. Don't put this on me. Her breath hitched, but I forced myself to hold her gaze. I'll figure things out with the kids. But us? We're done, Gia. She opened her mouth to argue, but I turned and walked away before she could. This time, there was nothing left to say. The weight of the conversation clung to me as I stood at the doorway of our bedroom, staring at the life I was about to leave behind. The air felt thick with the echoes of everything we'd shared, the laughter, the late-night whispers, the promises we'd made when we still believed in forever. But now, all I could see were the shadows of Gia's betrayal, stretching long and dark across every memory. She stood a few feet away, shoulders trembling, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. But I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for her. Not after everything. Not after him, Clyde, please, she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. Think about the kids, think about us. Don't throw everything away because of one mistake. One mistake? I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. This wasn't a mistake, Gia. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something you regret. What you did, what you've been doing, was a choice. Over and over again. She flinched as if I'd struck her, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. You didn't just cheat on me, I continued, my voice rough with the effort to keep control. You betrayed everything we built. You lied to my face while sneaking around with a man who had power over you. And you did it knowing what it would do to this family if I ever found out. I did it for us, she cried, her voice rising. For the kids, for our future. If I'd gone to jail, what would have happened to them? To you? I did what I had to do. No, I shot back, my pulse thundering in my ears. You did what you wanted to do. Don't stand there and pretend this was some noble sacrifice. If it had been about saving the family, it would have ended the moment those charges disappeared. But it didn't, did it? Gia shook her head frantically, tears falling faster now. I never meant for it to go this far. I swear, I didn't, but it did. I cut her off, my voice low and raw. And now, here we are. Silence wrapped around us like a suffocating blanket. Somewhere down the hall, one of the kids laughed at something on TV, a sound so pure and innocent that it nearly broke me right then and there. I drew a shaky breath, my hands clenching and unclenching at my sides. This isn't just about you and me, I said, my voice rough but steady. This is about them. About what kind of example we're setting. I won't let them grow up in a house built on lies. Gia took a step toward me, desperation etched into every line of her face. But we can fix this, Clyde. I can fix this. Just give me a chance, please. I closed my eyes, the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest. Every instinct in me screamed to turn away, to walk out the door and never look back. But the faces of our children flashed through my mind, their laughter, their hugs, the way they still looked at us like we were their whole world. I'll do whatever it takes, Gia whispered. I'll cut off all contact with him. I'll go to therapy. I'll do anything you ask. Just, don't take this family away from me. Her words hung in the air, heavy with a desperation that might have moved me once. But now, I took a step back, the distance between us feeling like a chasm and neither of us could cross. I'm not the one who took this family away, I said softly. You did that the moment you chose him over us. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might fall to her knees right there. But she stayed standing, trembling beneath the weight of everything she'd done. I'll stay until we figure things out with the kids, I said, my voice tight. But after that, I'm leaving. No, please, I'm done, Gia. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobs echoing behind me. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling as the events of the past few days replayed in my mind. Every lie, every stolen glance, every late-night phone call echoed through the darkness like whispers I couldn't escape. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke to the faint sound of footsteps outside the door. The clock on the nightstand read 2:17 a.m. I sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from my eyes as the footsteps moved down the hallway toward the kitchen. Curiosity and something darker pulled me from the bed. The house was silent as I made my way down the hall, the faint glow of the refrigerator light casting long shadows across the floor. I paused at the doorway, heart hammering in my chest as I watched Gia standing at the counter, phone clutched tightly in her hand. Her fingers flew across the screen, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. I stepped into the room, my voice low but firm. Who are you texting? She jumped, spinning around with wide eyes. Clyde. Give me the phone. No, wait, before she could stop me, I grabbed the phone from her hand. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scanned the screen, my eyes locking onto the name at the top of the message thread, Judge Hawthorne. That my breath caught in my throat as I read the last message she'd sent. He knows. I don't know what to do. Beneath it, Hawthorne's reply blinked on the screen, as if he was still typing. That I looked up slowly, meeting Gia's panicked gaze as the phone buzzed again in my hand. Hawthorne, we need to meet. Tomorrow. Usual place. Don't tell him. Silence pressed down like a weight too heavy to bear. That I stepped back, heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. You're still talking to him? Clyde, please, you just told me you'd end it. My voice cracked, raw with betrayal. And you're still. I didn't know what else to do, she cried, tears streaming down her face. He's threatening me, Clyde. If I cut him off, he said he'd reopen the case. He could ruin everything. I froze. What? He has evidence, photos, messages. If I walk away, he said he'll make sure I go to jail. I can't let that happen. Not to the kids. My thoughts spun, the room tilting beneath my feet as 1,000 questions crashed through my mind. You should have told me, I whispered. I was scared, she sobbed, falling to her knees as the weight of it all seemed to collapse on her at once. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to lose you. I stepped back as if her words had physically struck me. My breath came in ragged bursts, my pulse roaring in my ears as the walls seemed to close in around me. That I had come looking for the truth, but now that I had it, I wasn't sure I could survive it. The world around me seemed to slow as Gia's sobs echoed through the kitchen. Her words still rang in my ears. He's threatening me. If I walk away, he said he'll make sure I go to jail. I stood frozen, my pulse thundering in my chest as the weight of everything pressed down on my shoulders. The betrayal. The lies. And now this, the shadow of Judge Hawthorne hanging over our family like a storm cloud we couldn't escape. That I wanted to scream. To shout. To demand why she hadn't come to me the moment this all started. But the look in her eyes, the raw fear, the desperation told me she was already drowning in guilt. That I forced myself to take a deep breath, clenching and unclenching my fists as I tried to steady the whirlwind inside me. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, my voice hoarse. I was scared, Gia whispered, wiping her eyes with trembling hands. I thought if I could keep him happy long enough, it would all go away. But it didn't. It just kept getting worse. I stared at her, torn between the anger burning in my chest and the memories of the woman I had once loved. The woman who now stood before me, broken by her own choices. We can't live like this, I said, my voice steadier now. I can't live like this. And neither can the kids. She clutched the edge of the counter as if it was the only thing holding her up. What are you going to do? I looked down at her phone still clutched in my hand, Hawthorne's message staring back at me. We need to meet. Tomorrow. Usual place. Don't tell him. Slowly, I placed the phone on the counter and met her gaze. I'm going to end this. The next day, I arrived at the place where they usually met, a secluded parking lot near an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I parked a few spaces away, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Minutes felt like hours as I waited. Finally, Hawthorne's car pulled into the lot, its sleek black frame gliding to a stop near the warehouse entrance. I watched as he stepped out, adjusting his tie with the confidence of a man who thought he was untouchable. That I stepped out of my car, the cold air biting against my skin as I crossed the distance between us. His eyes narrowed slightly as he spotted me, but his smile never wavered. Clyde, he said smoothly. This is unexpected. Cut the act, I said, stopping a few feet away. It's over. He tilted his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. Over? I'm not sure what you mean. I know everything, I said through clenched teeth. The threats. The manipulation. You're not going to control my family anymore. Hawthorne chuckled softly, as if I'd told a joke. You seem to misunderstand the situation. Your wife came to me, Clyde. I didn't force her to do anything. I took a step closer, my pulse hammering. You blackmailed her. Threatened to destroy her life if she didn't give you what you wanted. But it ends now. I've already spoken to the authorities. If you come near my family again, you'll be the one behind bars. His smile faltered, just for a moment. You have no proof. I have everything I need, I cut him off, my voice firm. And trust me, I won't hesitate to use it. For a long moment, we stood there, the tension between us thick enough to choke on. Finally, Hawthorne took a step back, adjusting his cuffs with a forced smile. Well, it seems you've made your point, he said. I have no desire to cause any complications. Consider the matter closed. I held his gaze for a moment longer, making sure he saw the fire in my eyes, the promise that if he ever came near my family again, I wouldn't stop until he paid the price. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the cold. By the time I returned home, the weight on my chest had begun to lift just slightly, but enough to remind me that life could move forward. Gia was waiting in the kitchen, her eyes wide with anxiety as I stepped inside. What happened? She asked softly. It's over, I said, meeting her gaze. He won't bother us again. Her shoulders sagged with relief, tears slipping down her cheeks as she covered her mouth with her hand. But that doesn't change what happened, I added, my voice gentle but firm. I can't forget what you did, Gia. I can't pretend like none of this happened. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. But please, give me a chance to make things right. For the kids. For us. I looked away, the memories of her betrayal still fresh in my mind. But so were the memories of the life we had built, the love we had shared before everything fell apart. I can't promise that everything will go back to the way it was, I said. But for the sake of our family, I'm willing to try. One step at a time. Gia nodded, tears still falling as she whispered, thank you for giving us a chance. I stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. The scars of betrayal didn't fade overnight. But maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal, together. Months later, the echoes of the past still lingered, but they no longer defined us. Hawthorne had disappeared from our lives, and the threat of his influence had faded into memory. Gia and I worked to rebuild what had been broken slowly, cautiously, but with a shared determination to move forward. There were still moments of doubt, still nights when the ghosts of what had happened whispered in the dark, but each day, the weight of the past grew a little lighter. And as I stood on the porch one evening, watching our children play in the yard, I took a deep breath and let the last fragments of the past slip away, because the future was ours to write, one step at a time.